Good evening, everyone. This is Scott Harney from Esoteric Guides, live from New York City, Lower East Side. And I'd like to introduce Alan Steinfeld and Making Contact with Henrietta Weekes and special guest Nick Pope. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Scott. Scott, great to be here. There is a little bit of an echo.
Okay.
Maybe on Henrietta's end.
Actually, what we do is we need everyone to have headphones on.
Could, yeah, but I think anyway, it's okay. It's just a little feedback.
Okay.
I think that's better. That's better on your side? Okay, I just wanted to welcome everyone to this program called Making Contact. This is a ongoing tribute to this book that's coming out that I curate. There's still a little echo there. Maybe you can mute yourself, Henrietta, for now.
I did. It didn't make any difference.
Okay. So I'm very happy to have on this program. It's a continuing series about people who have contributed to this new book from St. Martin's called Making Contact. It's an anthology of, I feel, the best experts in the world on the UFO phenomena. And I'm joined each week by my co-host Henrietta Weekes, who is a contributor to the book, and she has a lot of background with the phenomenon. But I'm very happy to have here really one of the forerunners in the field, one of the experts, the go-to person when there's a sighting, and news organizations like CNN, Fox News, New York Post turn to Nick Pope and say, Nick, can you explain what's happening? He's also leads off the book, Making Contact, that you can buy on Amazon, called Making Contact by Alan Steinfeld, curating. I think I'll put the link in here. And Nick's chapter is about government mindsets and our future among the stars. And he has a background because he worked as an investigator for the UK Ministry of Defense. And since he's retired, he's really become the go-to person. So, Nick, how's that for an introduction? And I heard we just had a pretty big sighting today that's hit all the papers. Do you want to talk about where we are in the disclosure movement? Because it's a very exciting time to be in the disclosure field. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, sure. A lot going on right now. And a lot of developments in Congress, a lot of developments in the military and in the intelligence community. We can get into some of that with the requirement that's been written into the COVID-19 relief bill. But the sightings don't stop, of course. They continue on a daily basis. And yes, there's been a fascinating encounter reported involving an American Airlines aircraft. And they had, well, I kind of reluctant to use this phrase, but almost a near miss with a cylindrical shaped UFO. A lot of people doing a lot of digging into this. Freedom of Information Act requests. I think it's the War Zone and the Drive that are doing a lot of the reporting on this. They just got a statement, incidentally, today out of the FAA, confirming that yes, the pilot did see a UFO, and that's about all the statement says. So it's kind of doesn't really go into too much detail, but it is what it is, and it was over New Mexico.
That is a breakthrough because the FAA doesn't really usually come out with that kind of UFO information. I mean, right?
Right, and I think it just shows how the landscape has changed over the last few months and indeed 2 to 3 years. Out of the fringe and into the mainstream, pilots who previously would have most likely stayed silent about this, now feeling they can speak out because, of course, the Department of Defense has gone on the record with this. They've started issuing press releases. There is a body called the UAP Task Force, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, set up in Office of Naval Intelligence looking at this. So now, instead of being silent, instead of fearing ridicule and disbelief, these pilots, whether they're civil or military, who are having these sightings, are now speaking out, and good for them.
Very good for them. Let's go back to like where it began for you in Britain. My co-host Henrietta is also from the UK, and Nick was working with the Ministry of Defense, Henrietta. And how well known was the Ministry of Defense for you in your days in the UK? And did you ever hear about the UFO investigations that Nick and that department were doing?
Were you asking
Yes.
me?
Well,
Comment on the Ministry of Defense.
What the feedback is so weird. Do you know what that
No,
is?
but I'll mute. Go ahead.
Okay. Because it's coming back to me. Let me just see if it's right. Is this better?
That's better. Yeah. If some feedback, disconnect your headphones.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
it's better this way.
Okay.
I mean, I have
I'm curious about how much you knew about the UFO program Nick was involved in the UK when you were growing up.
Growing up, you know, I didn't. But since I've been researching it, you know, my stepfather was in the military, and we lived sort of near a military base up north in Lancashire, near Bamber Bridge, Preston. And I've since investigated that there were a lot of UFO phenomena in that area. Hence my feeling that I had these experiences, and something very strange was going on at the headquarters there.
What was the UK a particularly popular place for sightings more than other places, Nick?
Yes, the UK has always been a bit of a UFO hotspot. But part of that may simply be because there's something of a bias, I suppose, towards the English language when it comes to this topic. So one hears a lot about the United States, one hears a lot about the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. We perhaps don't hear as much as we should from other parts of the world because of the language, because of the culture, because of the political systems. Sometimes, of course, with some countries not being that open and not having a free press. But make no mistake about it, this is a global phenomena. But yes, over the years, the UK has absolutely been a hotspot.
Yeah.
And Henrietta, perhaps I can just ask. Oh, I was just going to say, are you referring to the BAE facility up at Wharton or anywhere close to there? Because that's certainly somewhere where I've heard a lot of strange stories.
No, it's actually not there, although I'd read about that. It was a place called Curden Close, and the Ministry of Defense was there. And my stepfather was in the army at the time. So, you know, I've since spoken to people who suggested that my experiences were connected to the locale, should we say. Yeah.
Do you know that place, Nick?
No, I'm not familiar with that, but I'm very familiar with BAE Wharton, where many people have reported strange things in the skies and some other odd phenomena too. But I think it gets to the heart of one of the most interesting current debates about UFOs, because some people are saying, you know, these things are literally extraterrestrial spacecraft, and others are saying, if they're more skeptical, no, couldn't this be our own technology, black projects, highly classified secret prototype aircraft, missiles or drones being tested and developed. And of course, at any given time, there are such things, but of course, we in government know where we test our own things.
So what is your feeling? Are they extraterrestrial then, from what your years of research?
Well, I certainly can't rule that out. And I think when it comes to the UFO phenomenon, I would be very surprised if there is ever a big moment where everything's revealed. I'd be surprised if there's one single neat solution to this. I suspect there are lots of different things going on. And everyone, of course, has their own theories. And who's to say who's right or wrong? So some people talk about extraterrestrials, other people talk about interdimensionals, other people talk about intertemporals, time travel. A few years ago, a lot of this would probably have been dismissed as science fiction. But now when one sees, for example, the sorts of research going on at the Large Hadron Collider, looking, for example, for these hidden dimensions that are actually needed for something like string theory to stand up in the first place, then it doesn't, suddenly none of this sounds so crazy.
Yeah. Do you think some of the hesitancy for disclosure on the parts of governments, UK, US, is because the phenomena is so complex?
That's certainly a part of it. I think there are multiple reasons for that secrecy and that reluctance. Firstly, governments, and particularly the defense and military intelligence side of things, are inherently secretive organizations anyway. So the default position is to say nothing, or at least as little as one can get away with, given the Freedom of Information Act. But of course, there are exemptions there. I think another point is technology acquisition. Whatever we're dealing with here, you could almost view this as like a new space race, where you have sitting around the table the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, maybe some others too. And everyone's saying to themselves, look, I don't necessarily buy into all the theories. I don't necessarily know what we're dealing with here. But if, just if, any of this is something new, something different, something other, the first nation, or maybe these days, we should be talking about corporations as well, but let's just stick with nations. The first nation to get this tech will be the dominant force on this planet for the foreseeable future. And in that circumstance, if we're all scrambling around to try and acquire this technology, to figure it out for ourselves, you wouldn't want to tell everyone else, even your allies, what's going on or how much you know. You imagine this as like a high stakes card game. And the one thing you never do at a card game is show the other players what your hand is.
But we already do have the technology. If you listen to the Rodwell reports, the history of crash retrievals, what Eric Davis informed the Senate of just last summer, that we have actual technology. So the race is on, and it already is there. And I think the U.S. has some kind of imperial hold on that race. It seems to me. I mean, what's your inside opinion about that?
Well, I suppose the United States has a preeminent position in this, certainly. But I think what we're seeing now, and you can see this in the wider space program, is that you have a lot of pushback. So not only do Russia and China and some of the European nations now have a space program, but look, recently we've heard, for example, about Israel, and we've heard about the United Arab Emirates. We hear a lot about other nations who are going to be dominant powers here in the next few years, like India and Brazil, and some other players too. The Japanese are in this. I mean, so look, I think the idea that America is the final and sole arbiter here is yesterday's paradigm. And there are new players in the game. And let's not forget, as I alluded to earlier, the corporations. So we've got people like Richard Branson. We've got people like Yuri Milner. Of course, we've got Elon Musk. And all these people will doubtless want their say too. And again, rightly so.
Well, we especially have Bob Bigelow, who's very vocal about the UFO programs and his research. So I'll ask one more question, and then Henrietta could jump in, and then we'll go back and forth. Is it imminent? Is there something, because it's been breaking fast, is there something that you feel is going to blow the whole thing wide open in the next year or so?
Well, I think the big thing, and I'll mention this briefly, and then after you go to Henrietta, we can maybe circle back to it, because I think it's going to need a little bit more time to fully unpack this. But the big thing coming this year is, of course, this 180-day countdown that started on December 27th, when the COVID-19 relief bill was enacted. And I can explain a bit more detail about why it's in the COVID bill, because a lot of people are saying, hey, why is it there? And that started a few conspiracy theories. But that's the big thing. And the deadline is, I think it's June 25th. And that will be the day by which, and we can get into questions of might it come earlier or will it need an extension and be later? But June 25th is the day by which, according to what's gone into the act, DNI, so Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with the Secretary of Defense and other agency heads and experts as required, must deliver to the Senate Intelligence Committee a report on UFOs. And we can get into a lot about why that was asked for, what must be in it, how much the media and the public will see. We can get into that later. But that's going to be the big story this year, I think.
Well, that's great, because the book that we're all part of is sort of due out right then. And I think it would be a great plus for the congressional hearings around that to have a copy of what all these experts have to say. So we'll come back to that. Henrietta, do you want to jump in with a question? Then we'll come back to the 188-day COVID relief.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm just really interested in what Nick was saying. I mean, I think you should keep going with that.
Let's do that, Nick. Let's take it apart.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me, for those that don't know, let me explain how this happened and why it's in the COVID bill, because I think I want to clear that up first before it starts too many rumors and conspiracy theories. But what happened was that, as many people know, over the last 3 years, there's been a series of related events, starting with the New York Times breaking the story that the Pentagon had a program called ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, widely believed to be a UFO research and investigation effort, though there is still some uncertainty about exactly what they did. And in parallel with the revelation about ATIP came the revelation that there had been a number of incidents where US Navy jets had filmed UFOs on their forward-looking infrared cameras. And I think most people have seen those videos. They are 100% genuine US Navy videos. The DoD confirmed that. They put out a press release confirming it, and also saying that the phenomena shown in these videos remains unidentified. In parallel with all that, there were a series of classified briefings in Congress, in both the Senate and the House, the Armed Services Committee and the Intelligence Committee. Now, the Senate Intelligence Committee has taken the lead. And last June, they wrote into the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, and it's there in black and white on pages 11 and 12. They wrote in some material under the heading Unidentified Aerial Threats. And they basically said, look, there's a lot of people in government with information about UFOs, but they're not talking to each other. And we, the committee, can't get a definitive answer on who knows what and who is doing what. So what they want is a report drawing together who does know what and who's doing what, and assessing a proper intelligence assessment of the phenomenon itself and any defense and national security implications for the United States. And they want it within 180 days. So what happened, and here's the COVID connection, what happened was it went into the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021, but that was not going to get through. There wasn't enough time to get it enacted. So they found a bill that everyone knew was going to go through. And because this was uncontentious, they piggybacked it onto it. Now, there's nothing unusual about this. This sort of legislative piggybacking goes on all the time. So the Intelligence Authorization Act got piggybacked onto the COVID-19 relief bill and the Omnibus Act. And as I say, it's now law. So this is a done deal. To further complicate things, technically, it's not actually in the act, but it's linked to it by a congressional note. But I double-checked this. I reached out to the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and I said, are you aware that this is now in the bill, which is enacted, and are you intending to abide by this and do the report? And they said, yes, we're aware, and yes, we're going to comply. So it's going to happen.
So what is going to happen? What do you suspect? Is it going to be new revelations, or is it the same old thing?
Well, as ever with these things, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that for the first time, I think, you've got really informed people. These people have already had the briefing. So when you're talking about Armed Services Committee people, Intelligence Committee people, they have already had a briefing, which I believe was at the level top secret. And they came out of that briefing pretty, I think, definitely of the mind that something more needs to be done about this so that Congress can take some informed decisions. So nobody's going to be able to get away with the sorts of bland material that the media and the public usually get fobbed off with, because these are people like Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio, and by the way, one of the really interesting people to watch with all this is the vice president, because Kamala Harris sat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. So she's probably had that briefing, and maybe she, as opposed to President Biden, will take the lead. We don't know yet, but none of those people are, particularly those that have had the classified briefing, are going to accept just platitudes. They are going to want firm answers and a proper intelligence assessment of the phenomenon itself. And another thing that they've said, and this is in the bill, they want a single official nominated within government who is going to be accountable for this across government. So no more can CIA say, well, we've got some files, but maybe FBI have got some too. And no more can the US Navy say, well, we're doing some things, but maybe the Air Force is in this too. No, a single point of contact is going to take the lead for this and be accountable for this right across all of government, the military, and the intelligence agencies.
Well, that's really good news. But you said there's the other side. That's what is the other side of that? Because that's amazing. If that could come out, and finally we have a single source where all the secrets are revealed. This is what we've been looking for 75 years. But what's the other side of that?
The bad news is sadly that while this report must be unclassified, it can have a classified annex And so the bad news is that the media and the public are very unlikely to get anything substantial, and certainly they won't get the classified information. So they'll either get the unclassified summary, which may well be the sorts of usual bland platitudes, or they will get something so heavily redacted it looks like those documents that the late great Stanton Friedman was always pulling out of the system. In other words, almost completely blacked out with the odd word "and" or "the" in there.
Well, there is also the possibility that perhaps something will sneak out, right? I mean, there is that possibility.
Oh, it only takes one maverick senator to say this is an outrage, and I'm going to, these people get the microphones thrust under their face, and they maybe get asked for a comment, and sometimes, even if it's classified, they say a little bit more than they should. And even if they don't, they know where the line is. They can go right up to it without crossing it. And they can drop some pretty heavy hints about what it is we're dealing with.
Right. I mean, there was that whole Eric Davis briefing, the New York Times reported in August, where he talked to Rubio about these crash retrievals in the possession of the government. That was a huge breakthrough, I thought. I mean, nothing really came of that. Why? I mean, it should have.
This is a hugely complex and contentious part of this whole story. We've all heard, of course, the phrase metamaterials in relation to UFOs. And some people believe this literally means, for example, wreckage from the Roswell crash.
Right.
But other people are being more skeptical. So, for example, we've got Eric Davis, who you mentioned, and then we've got the interrelated story of the Admiral Wilson leak, and again, documents purporting to be a the Men in Black abducted me there for a moment, I think.
They did. They were being censored. Yes. Go ahead.
The Men in Black cut me off there. I say that most people know where the line is and don't cross it. Obviously, I got a little bit too close there. That was a little shot across the bows. No, so there's the Admiral Wilson leak, which purports to be a note of a meeting that took place between Admiral Wilson, former DIA chief, Edgar Mitchell, and some other people, various researchers. Lots of questions over some of this, some skeptical voices too. John Greenwald at the Black Vault has done some good research into this. He's a little bit more cautious, I think, about some of these stories of metamaterials. Richard Dolan has done some fabulous work. I think I confess I haven't listened to it yet. I think he did a 5-hour deep dive into this the other day. So my goodness, if you want material on metamaterials, Richard Dolan, John Greenwald, the Eric Wilson material, of course, the Times.
I was just going to say,
the Times ran something.
Linda Moulton Howe actually said her and Art Bell received metamaterials are supposedly these material complex chemically bonded metals and other substances from UFOs, supposedly. And Linda Moulton Howe said hers were brought under electron microscope, and they couldn't figure out how the benzene, zinc, nickel layers could have been formulated here on Earth. That's part of the metamaterial mysteries that we're talking about, right?
That's right, yes. And Linda, I think, passed some of that material to Tom DeLonge's group, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. And look, there are a couple of really, really fairly basic tests that you can do with anything to determine whether it's unusual. The first is X-ray diffraction. And that will tell you if there's anything unusual about the structure of the material. But the other fairly easy thing to do. And by fairly easy, I mean it's if it isn't high school level, and it may be these days, it's certainly basic college chemistry and metallurgy level, is isotopic ratio analysis. Because the example I often give is a lot of people buy and sell meteorites, right? Well, if you buy a meteorite for $10,000 from me, you need to know that it's not just a rock that I picked out of my backyard. So because the Earth's atmosphere protects us from cosmic rays and other cosmic radiation that is present in space and on other celestial bodies, there are differences in the isotopes. I mean, each chemical element has, some of them have different isotopes, and you can tell, you can test for this, and this will simply, as a binary yes, no answer, tell you whether something is terrestrial or extraterrestrial. So in other words, is this just a rock from my backyard, or is it a meteorite? Is it a piece of industrial waste from some factory, or is it something from the Roswell crash, if you want to paraphrase it in that way? So these things have been done. And one other piece of that whole metamaterial puzzle, by the way, and the New York Times deep dive into the Admiral Wilson story that many people thought and hoped they were going to do, but that's another story. One other final aspect here is that the US Army entered into what's called a CRADA, which is a collaborative research and development agreement with Tom DeLonge's To the Stars group about these materials. So look, if these were just pieces of rock from someone's backyard, I don't think that the US Army, and specifically Materiel Command, would have been interested in acquiring this and learning from whatever research and development was done into this. So look, there's a lot to unpack there, but we have not heard the end of this metamaterial story for sure.
So we have the metamaterial proposed because they wouldn't be doing all these tests, like you're saying, without it having some evidence that it was off-world. And so the COVID relief bill and these disclosures that will happen around June 24th, which Masahiro in the chat says is a very important UFO day. That was the day Kenneth Arnold saw what he named flying saucers over Mount Rainier in Washington. So it would be interesting, all this information being exposed, and suddenly we are in these new realities. I mean, I think that's a possibility. Do you see something like that, Nick, unfolding as when the information is disclosed on whenever time frame? How is that going to change the world we know and live by?
Well, that's a big question there, Alan. Thank you. No,
well,
I think that's certainly a 5-hour show. But no, look, let me preface my answer by saying, of course, it depends what we're dealing with. There's a whole spectrum here. There's disclosure with a big D, as many people in the UFO community hope and expect, a sort of my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. But it's also possible to view disclosure not as a single event, but as a process. And many of the things that we've discussed today will be part of that process. And one day we'll wake up and we'll find that disclosure has been and gone. So I think, but to answer your question, look, if we're dealing with anything at the high end of the spectrum, then clearly it would touch every aspect of our lives: politics, religion, science, technology. the economy, people's personal worldview and paradigm. There's almost literally no aspect of our lives that wouldn't be affected in some way by this new reality. And everything we knew would have to be reframed. Everything we thought we knew about the world, about our place in it, our place in the wider cosmos, would have to be rethought, rewritten, and good. I think that sort of big reset, or whatever you call it, would be good for us. It would be sort of clearing out the cobwebs of the old world paradigms and replacing it with something new and exciting, where actually it's much less anthropocentric. I mean, humanity has always somewhat arrogantly put itself at the center of the universe. I think the Renaissance and the scientific revolution taught us a little bit of humility, but my goodness, maybe disclosure will teach us even more, and we'll realize that far from being at the center of anything, we're likely at the periphery of it. So interesting times.
It's really interesting times. Henrietta, why don't you jump in, because you've looked at lots of this.
Yeah, well, no, that's fascinating what you've said. Sorry, the sound is really bothering me. But I don't know how we turn off the echo. But what you were just saying, Nick, about disclosure as a process, that's how I'm thinking of it too. And that we're actually possibly about to do this huge evolutionary leap in terms of who we are in the cosmos. I mean, it just seems like we're on the cusp of it. And everything you've said, all the government information, to me seems, I mean, it's interesting, but it's kind of peripheral in a way to what people's experience is going to be. Do you know what I'm saying?
I know absolutely what you're saying, and I agree with it. And I think the really great thing about that is it's a sort of democratization of the phenomenon.
Exactly.
And instead of being dependent on government to give us the answers, we all become part of the answer. So your experiences and your research, Alan's upcoming book, it's all part of this process. All of us have a part to play. No one gets left out or left behind, and everybody's voice has an equal say in this. Nobody is unimportant. Nobody is not allowed to take part in this debate.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just on Clubhouse with Roderick Martin, the MUFON director, and he was including a lot of people in this discussion. If you're here today, Roderick, make yourself known. You can add to the conversation. But that is so important for people to know. We're taking authority out of the hands of government. We're giving it back to ourselves where it always belonged in the first place.
Yeah.
So.
You could imagine this as a three-way relationship, a triangle, if you were. In one corner you have the government, the military, the intelligence community, but essentially the government, the authorities. In another corner you have everyone, us, the people, whether they're experiencers, whether they're witnesses, whether they're researchers, whether they're investigators, or whether they're just people who, as this unfolds, will have an opinion. And it doesn't have to be any particular sort of opinion. They can be skeptics, they can be believers, they can be agnostics. Everyone gets a say. As I call this, the democratization of this. But let's not forget the third part of the equation, and that's the phenomenon itself. And whoever or whatever we're dealing with there, let's not forget that they or it may have its say too. So things are going to get interesting, I think. But gone are the days where we're all sitting there passively waiting for the government to tell us about this, or waiting for a Woodstein, a Woodward and a Bernstein to break the story out of government and bring it to the people. Gone are those days. I think it's now we're all in the mix.
Right, exactly. And so that changes everything about our structure of society and who we know ourselves to be. But has the phenomena itself changed at all over the years? Are they just I mean, you've been involved in this a long time. Have you noticed a shift in their relationship to us from what we can see on the outside? And are they just waiting for something? What's going on? Your best guess, of course, you know.
Well, it's a really interesting question, but it's very difficult to answer because I think we don't really have an unfiltered view of the phenomenon. The phenomenon comes to us through the eyes and the minds of the witnesses and the experiencers. And inevitably, therefore, it can only really be perceived and interpreted through people's cultural background, their existing knowledge, their belief systems. So are we seeing the phenomenon as it really is, or are we simply putting our own spin on it, so to speak? And might it, in almost some sort of quantum physics way, might it not take something from the observer itself? You know, it's like the act of observing collapses a wave into a particle. Does the phenomenon itself respond to interaction and become something that derives an element of its essence from that with which it interacts, i.e. us? So some big, almost unanswerable questions.
But is there evidence of that in your research and investigations of the observer phenomena? Have you seen that?
I think it's more anecdotal evidence than empirical, because one might simply say that, boiled down to its basics, UFO hunters see UFOs, ghost hunters see ghosts, religious people see religious apparitions and visitations. I mean, one of the examples I often give is, if a shadowy figure this evening were to appear at the foot of your bed, how you interpret that phenomenon depends on who you are and what you believe. So, for example, a religious person might think of it as an angel or a demon. Somebody interested in the paranormal might think in terms of ghosts. Somebody interested in UFOs might think that they were having an abduction experience. Now, are any of those people necessarily right or wrong, or are they simply interpreting it and maybe to some extent almost shaping it themselves through the lens of their perception?
Right. I mean, something exists outside of, independent also of our perception, if you don't count quantum physics. But what you're saying also reminds me of that famous quote from Ram Dass, who said, when a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are pockets, you know. So we just see things from the perspective we're coming from. But I do think the phenomena exists outside, this is my kind of Newtonian view, our perception in their own right and essence.
And in and in all of this, we we mustn't forget that in a universe nearly 14 billion years old, we might be dealing with civilizations with a billion years head start on us. And what would that look like in terms of interaction? And how much, if anything, would we really understand about them? Or would it be, as the British Astronomer Royal once remarked, would us meeting extraterrestrials and them trying to explain things to us, would it be analogous to us trying to explain quantum physics to chimpanzees, with us this time in the role of the chimpanzees?
Right.
So are there some things that for us, as we currently are in our sort of intellectual level of evolution, are there certain things which are simply beyond our comprehension and perhaps even perception, even though they may be absolutely physically real?
Yeah, no, Henrietta, please comment, because that's a field you like to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, I just, sorry, this sound thing is very troubling. Did I want to say what you were saying about how everybody sees things through a different lens?
Yeah.
I think that we have absolutely no idea what this is, but it's definitely happening. It's been happening for a long time to thousands of people, whether it's UFOs or experiences or these strange figures, which everybody seems to have, similar experiences. My experiences are very similar to many other people's. So something's happening. I almost think that it's very exciting, this idea of the ability to be completely open-minded and stare into the unknown and kind of see what happens. And I was very interested in what you said about the observer in quantum physics changing matter, waves into particles. Because I think that relationship, if one is open, then perhaps the answers begin to become clear. If one comes with a preconceived anything, you haven't got much chance of investigating what that really is.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump on that.
Investigating the unknown.
I just want to jump on that for a second, because what the UFO experience is doing, if we want to call it that, is showing us the mystery of creation itself.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it, because we can do away with all our intellect in that particular observation of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick, jump in.
No, I think these are all fascinating points, and the great thing about all of this is that nobody at the moment can say, "Oh, that's wrong," or "That's nonsense." So I think all of this goes into the mix, and I do hope, incidentally, that those people watching now and watching and listening a little later haven't struggled too much with the sound. I hope that people have kind of understood most of it, and maybe some cleaning up can be done in post-production, because I think, and I know we've got another 10 minutes or so before we wrap up, but I think we've covered a lot of fascinating material here, whether it's the deeply factual material about what's happening with the Senate Intelligence Committee and the report from Director of National Intelligence, to the more interesting speculative philosophical discussions about the true nature of the phenomenon and our relationship with it.
Yeah. No,
can I ask you a question, Nick? How much have you experienced personally? Are you willing to talk about that?
Yeah, sadly, the answer to that's none. It's I suppose. No, it's one of those ironies that having, I suppose, investigated several thousand UFO sightings, abduction experiences, alien contact, however you want to categorize it, but also having looked at things like crop circles and animal mutilations and some ghost stories too. I mean, you can't investigate UFOs for the government and not find yourself as the focal point for anything weird, wonderful, and unexplained. And heck, there's nowhere else to send it in government. So we dabbled in quite a few things. We even looked at the MOD had at one point, and I think this has been declassified and released now. Well, I know it has been a study into remote viewing, so so-called psychic spying. So there's a lot of fascinating things out there, and a lot of mysteries.
You know, I am going to clean up the sound on this because I think there is a lot of valuable pieces that people can learn from this discussion. What I'm learning, someone asks in the chat here the question, why do the UFOs need promotion from the government? Why can't they just show themselves? Well, that's a question, somebody like Grant Cameron is talking about, saying, well, they're waiting for us to wake up, and they're maybe even running the government, some people say. I don't know. What's your answer to that, about why don't they just show themselves? That's the White House law.
Well, sure. I mean, it's absolutely, I was just going to say, it's the archetypal, why don't they land on the White House lawn? But of course, you've only got to know your sci-fi to know the answer to that. If you've watched the original The Day the Earth Stood Still, to know how things can quickly and disastrously go wrong in that sort of situation. There's also the argument for some sort of Star Trek prime directive that might suggest an advanced civilization. And that's one of the few good assumptions we can make about extraterrestrials, is that if they can get here and we can't get there, they're more advanced than us, certainly in terms of understanding of science, in terms of engineering skills. But there's an argument, as I say, the prime directive argument, that you shouldn't interfere with the development of a newly emerging civilization, i.e. us, by making open contact. And there are all sorts of other interesting theories. We saw in Star Trek, for example, that there was a sort of threshold point for when you get the invitation to join the Federation. And in Star Trek, that threshold point was when you develop warp speed technology. Well, ATIP was certainly looking at that. So who knows? Maybe our invitation is in the mail. But I was at a scientific conference with the SETI people, the radio astronomers, and somebody said, well, at what point will they contact us? And somebody shouted out, I mean, a scientist, but I can't remember who or what their discipline was, that the answer might be when we do something sufficiently interesting to them.
Right.
I just wanted to say too that Anthony has said in the chat box, haven't they shown themselves already? Hasn't the government? I mean, that's my feeling, is that it's right here. It's evident that that there are these kind of different life forms. There are these different crafts. I've spoken to many people who've had experiences. It changes them, it seems to me. So it's like, as you said, Nick, at the beginning, it's a process. We're now in it. The conversation's expanding. It will soon just be kind of with us. But I don't think, like you said, suddenly. But it's very exciting that in the last year, it's become a lot more mainstream. It's not so odd.
Yes,
and unusual.
It certainly has become much more mainstream than it ever has been before, and I think that's a great sign. I mean, I think, just to answer that question, have they not already shown themselves? Well, to some people, but not to everyone. So it comes back to that point about that's fine for those that have had an experience or a sighting, but there are still vast numbers of people that haven't had a sighting or an experience, myself included, as I was saying previously. And of course, maybe a lot of people who haven't really thought about it because, you know, particularly in some other parts of the world, that it's not a priority for them. I mean, clean, fresh drinking water and food on the table and safety from warfare and militias is maybe more to the fore with them. So I think there is a difference between a personal contact, which I absolutely accept. A lot of people have had these sightings and experiences, and a global event which is so undeniable and repeatable that it is a done deal. And we're not there yet with the best will in the world.
Well, we're close, I think, to something. The non-interference, yes, seems to not apply in some cases because there's theories that we actually have been genetically modified by alien species in order to be so different than the rest of the animals here on the Earth. What do you think about that theory, Nick?
It might surprise you to learn I'm not actually a believer in that. I think some of my friends and colleagues on shows like Ancient Aliens, they believe that, but I'm a straightforward, no, it is what it is, standard evolutionary theory kind of person. So I don't see any need to insert extraterrestrials into that particular equation. I think the combination of random mutation and natural selection will do that, and has brought us from ape to human in I don't know 5 to 7 million years or whatever it is, and of course that process one can speculate will continue, and who knows where the human adventure will end, which is something, Alan, that I perhaps touched on briefly at the second half of the chapter in your upcoming book. So hopefully people will find that interesting.
Yes, Nick leads off this collection of essays in the book called Making Contact, because I felt his viewpoint was the most grounded in real world observations, working for the Ministry of Defense and talking about why governments do hold secrets. And from there, we progress more and more into the abstract, into the personal. But he does at the end of his essay speculate about our adventures in the stars and what might be in the future for humanity if we don't destroy ourselves, that is. So Nick, I'm really happy you were here today. Is there anything coming up for you you'd like to just promote and talk about?
Well, I have been doing a lot of television, some new episodes of Ancient Aliens coming up, some other things which I can't really announce until the network has announced, but a lot of interesting things in the can and on the way. So watch this space. And of course, when live events come back, I think a lot of people are very eager to resume in-person conferences, conventions, to hear the new research and to meet up with old friends and new. So lots of fascinating things on the horizon, TV events when they're back, and more besides. Some big stories coming too this year for sure.
Yeah, no, so excited about the big story in June. Maybe you want to come on Clubhouse. I've been part of a conversation with someone named Roderick Martin every Tuesday and Thursday night at 8:30 Central. Have you been on Clubhouse yet, the new hot app?
I can't say as I have. I find it difficult to keep up with the social media platforms I'm on, let alone use new ones, but I'll take a look. But I can't promise anything.
All right. Well, I wanted to thank you. I hope to do more of these with maybe a little more sophisticated technology, but with you as one of the real lead spokespeople in the disclosure movement. I'm very happy Nick Pope, and Henrietta Weekes, although she says now she's been taken by the men in black, so she's disappeared. I don't know how to get her back. And order the book on Amazon. It's called Making Contact, Preparations for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence, because as Nick was saying, it certainly will be, when it becomes a planetary event, an awakening for the collective humanity. So thanks for your time, Nick. I really appreciate this, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you, Henrietta, and thank you everyone else who was watching and listening. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Alan Steinfeld. You could subscribe to my YouTube channel, New Realities, youtube.com/New Realities. Look for me Tuesday and Thursday nights at the Roderick Martin Clubhouse chats. And I look forward to any questions. Email me at newrealities@earthlink.net. And thank you, Scott Harney, for producing this event. Scott, are you still there? Do you want to say anything? Henrietta says, thank you. Sorry, she's not here. Thank you, Nick. She disappeared. But, and we're going to do this next week too, maybe with another guest. So it's an ongoing series until the book is released, but order it now, pre-order it. And when you order it, maybe we'll have a whole other discussion about questions, particularly from the book. So Scott, we're signing off. Are you with us? And thank you everyone in the chat for being here, on the chat here on Comcast and on YouTube. So I don't know if we lost Scott too, but we are still broadcasting. While we're still on, Nick, I really appreciate your appearances in the New York Post. Do you have anything to say about Stephen Greenstreet and his ongoing series?
Oh, sure. Well, yeah, thank you. It's a good job I didn't press close video there. Yeah, Stephen Greenstreet has been one of the rising stars of this whole field, has done a huge amount to transition this subject, as I was saying, from fringe to mainstream. And he and I have collaborated on the series that he created, and that the two of us are on screen for, The Basement Office. And all those episodes are up there on YouTube. They're all completely free. Some of those episodes, I think, have been viewed over 1 million times. So it's done an immense amount. And yes, there are some plans for the future there. So Stephen Greenstreet, the New York Post, and The Basement Office have absolutely been at the forefront of this.
And Nick is becoming the superstar. He calls himself the real X-Files. I forgot that guy's name who's on X-Files. And
Fox Mulder.
Yes, you're the real Fox Mulder. So we'll look for you. Also look for Nick on CNN anytime there's a major UFO disclosure, Fox News. And there's Henrietta. So thanks, Henrietta. Anything final words you want to say here?
Wait, are we there?
I think we should sign off. Scott, why don't you jump back on and close out the session? Okay. Okay. I think we're good. Henrietta, are you still with us? All right. I am going to close the session then. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And see you next week, this time. Wednesdays nights, 7 p.m. East Coast time. And we'll take more questions next week from the crowd.